This incident involved a 74-year-old male patient found unresponsive at home. Bystander CPR was being done prior to arrival by family. Upon our arrival, we found the patient on the floor and started our own high-performance CPR on this patient. So this is going to be the first analyzed rhythm. Something I look for is were compressions being done prior to the AED actually applied. Were compressions being done while the pads were being applied? And the answer is yes, and I know that because we have some waveform here right before it analyzes, which tells me that compressions were being done while the AED pads were being applied. The second thing I look at is how long did it take us to get back on the chest after it said no shock advised, or if this was a shockable rhythm, it would have started charging. How fast did we get back on the chest as soon as it started charging, and then we finished 30? So this one said no shock advised. It took 2.5 seconds for us to get back on the chest after it said no shock advised. Nice job in keeping that number low. Remember, we keep that number low by hovering on the chest and anticipating doing compressions as soon as it says no shock advised or as soon as it's charging. So nice job, team. I'll remind you that not too long ago, before we started this QA/QI process, it was taking us over 5 seconds to get back on the chest. So we've really helped narrow that down through the QA/QI process and the constant training that we've done. So going forward, oddly enough, the team did some compressions, and then there was a pause here, right here. It was a weird pause, and I'm unsure exactly what that pause is for, or what caused it. Nothing in the PCR mentions the pause, and so I can guess that it may have been a change in the person doing compressions. Remember, we want to make that change here, if at all possible, because we can't touch the patient anyways. So I'm assuming that's what happened. The other thought is that perhaps the patient was moved during that time, and that's why we have that pause. Unsure again why we had that pause. So shortly after the AED was applied, ALS showed up on scene, so we only have that one AED rhythm to analyze. ALS showed up on scene, and they applied their monitor. I was able to get some data from the ALS agency from their monitor, and that's what we're looking at here. There were two big things that I wanted to get from their monitor, which was what did it look like when we put the ACCD on? Was the ACCD placed in a two-step process, and then how long did it take us to do that? And so that's what this data is going to show us. So what you see here is just the CPR waveform, and the CPR waveform is gathered by the puck that's placed by the Zoll monitor, and so that's what this data is from. Now, it looks like we had good compressions prior to the ACD being placed, so nice job there. We stopped compressions here, and we got back on the chest at this point. And something to note, it took 17 seconds to put the back plate underneath the patient, which is a little odd because it takes us, usually on average, it takes us only about 3 seconds to put the back plate on. So I'm unsure exactly what took so long in this aspect, but again, it took us 17 seconds to put the back plate on, that we didn't have any forward motion of blood. Now, here's the next rhythm. 30 compressions after they put the back plate, they went ahead and put the top piece on. Nice job, team, for that. Remember, we want to do at minimum of 30 compressions in between the back plate and the top piece because we want to minimize pauses and we want good forward motion of blood. So I'm pleased to see that there was at least 30 compressions done prior to putting the top piece on. So this is the 30th compression, and then you can see that they paused here. It took 6.5 seconds to put the top piece and get the first compression going. So in all, it took 23.5 seconds for us to put the entire ACCD on. On average, we've been able to do it in around 12 seconds or less. So again, I'm unsure exactly what happened here. Hopefully the January high-performance CPR training can help minimize this as well. So something I do want to note, though, is as you can see here, we have more of a compression waveform, and this is after the ACCD was placed. This is a little concerning because you'll remember that we aren't supposed to have anything underneath the plunger of the ACCD, and the fact that I can see a waveform here tells me that most likely there was probably that puck that was still underneath the plunger when once the ACCD was running. So remember that with this ALS agency, if they have a puck on the chest, when we put the ACCD on, we need to rip off that puck prior to putting the plunger down onto the chest and starting the ACCD. Okay, this is the first round of compressions after the ACCD was placed. Something I want to note here is this round of compressions from here to here, all of this, was 4 minutes and 26 seconds. So remember, we want to do a 2-minute timer on that. It's up to the team leader to make sure that we meet that 2 minutes. And I understand that there may be some variance, so usually as long as it's 2 minutes and 15 or minute and 45, somewhere in between that, that's an acceptable time range. Again, this was 4 minutes and 26 seconds for the first round of compressions. Now, I am pleased to say that this is the rest of the ACCD data. I'm pleased to say that the rest of these rounds of compressions were around 2 minutes. Some of them were exactly at 2 minutes. But there never was one that was less than 1:45 or over 2 minutes and 15 seconds. So nice job to the team leader on keeping track of those times. Something else I do want to know is there weren't any pauses here that were over 10 seconds. Now, with that being said, there were a couple pauses that were only a couple seconds, like 3 seconds I think was the lowest pause. I'm pleased that we're keeping pauses low for rhythm checks, but remember, you do want to give the rhythm check enough time to actually make sure that we don't have a slow rhythm and that we don't have a very slow pulse, right? If you check a pulse during the rhythm check for only 3 seconds or 4 seconds, you may miss the fact that the patient is super bradycardic and has a really, really low pulse. So make sure that you give enough time to ensure that we have no pulse and no real rhythm. Remember, we can take up to 10 seconds to do that. So just keep that in mind going forward. In all, this patient was pronounced on scene and was not transported to the patient. I don't know what the downtime was on this patient. What we do know is the patient wasn't found in a shockable rhythm, and we know that most patients not found in a shockable rhythm, usually in a asystolic rhythm, the likelihood in getting them back is quite low. I am pleased to see that most rounds of compressions were 2 minutes long, at least with the data that I have with me. So nice job on that. There's definitely some room for improvement, but keep up the good work.